Well, good morning, Rustin. It's good to be with you. And it's good to be at Vox. And I'm the visitor, so I'll get us started.
Yeah.
Visitors bat first. But again, my name is John Bowles. If you haven't seen our teaching before, and I'm the pastor of Beggars Table, and this is my colleague, Rustin Smith, who is the pastor of Vox Day, and it's an honor to be with you. And I enjoy our conversations so much. I really hope that we can offer something that you will be able to take home and be able to really engage and use, and that we can bring new meaning and new life to these words. Yeah. So we began a conversation a while ago on the Sermon on the Mount. So we just finished the Beatitudes. I think it was 2 weeks ago now that we finished kind of the first series within the series, which was on the Beatitudes. And I know when we decided to do this series, to choose the Sermon on the Mount, the COVID had already hit. And so we're in this time of COVID. Nobody knows what this is. Nobody knows how long it's going to last. And I know that we were both attracted to Jesus' words at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a man who builds his house in a solid foundation. And so we entitled this words to build a life on. And it just seemed really timely for COVID. And then, as we got going in the Beatitudes, more stuff started to happen in the culture that we never foresaw, but it kind of made them even more timely. I think a lot of the civil unrest that's going on right now, the Beatitudes were so helpful for me in kind of navigating through that. And now, as I was preparing for today, it struck me that this is really timely conversation in an election year. We have an election coming up, and people are going to be talking politics like crazy. And I just thought, this is timely for that, because we've already mentioned this before, but we can recap it, because the Sermon on the Mount can be seen as the politics of Jesus. He's outlining how we are to live together. In politic means...
Well, there's that word. It's become a dirty word in our culture.
Politics,
when we say, well, he's just playing politics, or he's just being political, that's a negative connotation normally. But the word politic, we've said we kind of want to redeem that, because a politic, it comes from the word that just means city or community. So a politic is just your idea of how you're going to agree to live together. So I always use the example of when I was single, I could do whatever I wanted to do with the toothpaste in the bathroom. But when I got married, now we have a community, and we have to have a conversation about what's going to happen with our toothpaste arrangement, right? That's politics. That's doing politics. When we had kids that came along, we just, we put them in their own bathroom and we built a wall. But that's doing politics. So politics is just how you agree to live in community together. And then when you widen that out to a homeowners association, or a city, or a nation and world, or Star Trek, or
exactly.
Beyond, I suppose.
It's expanding the boundaries of how we agree to live together.
So that's a holy thing, and those called to do politics, I think that's a holy vocation and calling. So I don't want to be disparaging of that, or, we'll all make our jokes as we do, and we're all frustrated as we are. But to serve one another in terms of doing politics is a holy thing. Should be.
And so I don't exactly know how this will play out as we move on through Matthew, but needless to say, it will probably build bridges between this conversation and current circumstances and things that are happening in our country. And I think that it's particularly hard for us because we have been trained to live with bifurcated lenses politically. And the way that we do life, we feel like you have to be in one camp over here or another camp over here. So we call it conservative and liberal. We call it right and left. We call it, but the idea is that you have to choose. You have to be in one or the other, or define yourself as against both. But either way, you're still seeing the world that way. And in as well as I do, that this is not the culture Jesus lived in and came from, and the politics of Jesus. I don't think they are dualistic. I don't think they are right or left, or even right or wrong necessarily. It's a completely different politic.
Yeah.
That's why I would be bold in saying that the politics of Jesus cannot be co-opted by our government, our dualistic party system.
Yeah.
They can't be co-opted by our right or left.
Yeah.
They're the politics of Jesus, or what I call, and you know this because we talk about this all the time, but a politic of love.
Yes.
So instead of rotating on an axis of who gets the most in power, it rotates on an axis of love, which involves caring for and sacrificing for one another, which is very foreign. And I think that if once we make a decision to live in the politic of Jesus, that we are immediately going to be misunderstood by any other politic.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter at what point in history we're talking about, whether you live in a monarchy, whether you live in a dictatorship, or you live in a theocracy. I always think of Rome as kind of a theocracy because the idea was that Caesar was a god.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of an oligarchy too, is what they call it when it's ruled by the Senate, and but still, or if you live today in America and you live in a dual party democracy, you're still going to be misunderstood if you try to follow the politic of Jesus, the politics of love.
Yeah. Well, I love the language you used of axis, that it rotates on a different axis. In other words, it's a completely different and foreign way of thinking about almost everything.
Yeah.
And what called to mind was the conversation that Pilate had with Jesus right before the whole event of the cross, and the exchange that they have, which is kind of those two ways of thinking coming in and colliding.
Right.
And Pilate's great question about what is truth, and the silence of Jesus in response to that. That it's just such a dramatic coming together of, like, we can't even talk about truth because we have completely different ideas about that. And of course, for both of them, truth meant the cross, but for Pilate, he meant the cross as truth, as in, I'm going to dominate you in the way of Rome. And for Jesus, he meant the cross is truth also, but in the way of, I'm going to give myself away to expose, confront, and defeat evil.
You know, that's great. It's a little bit of a foreshadow of what we can expect as we follow Jesus, is to be very misunderstood. Where we left off in the Beatitudes was with the idea of being persecuted. That's the final beatitude that Jesus talks about. Right. And sure enough, I mean, Rustin, I'll put it to you this way. Recently, I was accused of being wishy-washy. And I realized that I was accused, the person who was accusing me was someone who had extreme, what we'd call fundamentalist. He happened to be on the left side of the spectrum politically. But I realized that he was a fundamentalist left-winger, and I told you about it, and you said something pretty profound. You said, well, John, the only people who ever accuse me of being wishy-washy are extreme right or left, but when we follow Jesus, we don't find ourselves camping out in one tribe or the other, and those two people see us as wishy-washy.
Wishy-washy, because I think when you're in that mindset of it's left versus right, then anything other than left or right can look like you're trying to be a centrist. And I've been accused of that. Well, you're trying to please both sides, and like, no, that's not what I'm after either. I'm trying to follow Jesus and trying to live in the politic of Jesus and have my mind transformed by Jesus. And sometimes that's going to put me in a place that makes sense to neither end of this. In fact, I say sometimes. It feels like most of the time. There's no camp.
There's
no camp for people who are taking this stuff seriously.
Is acentrist? Is that a word?
I like it.
Yeah. Did you make that up?
No. Never heard that until just now, as far as I know.
So, all right. Well, I think that where we left off was, blessed are those who are persecuted. And, I'm going to ask you this question. If somebody told you that you're going to be persecuted for following this or whatever it is, and what's one of your knee-jerk reactions? Like, well, if you do this, you're going to be persecuted.
Well, I immediately think about how to avoid the persecution part and still get away with doing it.
Okay, there you go. That's what I thought of.
Really?
Is the first thing you think of is how I'm going to distance myself from the persecution. I'm going to
Okay,
flee.
yeah, I'm going to find a way to, yeah.
Yeah, to flee.
If there's a needle I can thread where I can still maintain integrity but avoid the persecution, I'm going to avoid that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that the next section of teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, which would be Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, is about being radically present.
Yeah.
And not avoiding, not fleeing, but being present.
Yeah.
And anyway, I thought maybe I would read these verses and then we'll get into it. So here's what Jesus says, starting with verse 13 of chapter 5. He says, you are the salt of the earth. I might stop for 1 second. Can I stop? Can I ask you to elaborate on the you being used here? Because you guys might not know this, but Rustin has actually written a seminary paper over this stuff. So he's got some really good information here. So
I did a lot of hard work on this.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago. No, it's just that word is the version of the word you get in that verse is an emphatic you. So I just think of it as the finger in the chest you.
Yeah.
Like nobody else is, as you say, salt first. Nobody else is the salt. You are.
You are.
Like, stop looking at me to do this. You do it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of you.
Yeah. Emphatic.
Emphatic you.
I don't know if this is right or not, but when I hear that, I always think like, so instead of Jesus saying you, like Israel, he's saying you, Rustin.
Yeah, possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in terms of responsibility, that stop praying about it.
And do
this is your responsibility.
Okay.
Right? This is who you are.
So that's good. That's you, emphatically you.
Emphatically you. You yourselves would be another way. It's plural, so you yourselves.
Okay. There you go.
Right? Okay.
You yourselves are the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
But if that salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. I mean, immediately we know that we're talking about the value of something.
Yeah.
Is it valuable or not? Can it be used or not?
Right.
Yeah. You, he goes on to say in verse 14, are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
It's a famous passage right there.
It is famous.
Yeah.
And, I feel like that's one of our battles, is that over familiarity.
Yeah.
So much of the Sermon on the Mount is so well known that it just, we almost turn it off when we hear it because we've heard it so much.
How many camp talks have you heard on salt?
Yeah, I know. And I'm trying to not say the same things I heard since I was 13 years old.
Right.
So
a lot of them were true.
Yeah.
And as far as they went.
Yeah, but we have a particular challenge is to really to help these words come alive.
Well, I think this whole thing has been like, let's give it a fresh hearing.
Yeah.
Let's come back around to it now and listen again.
So I want to suggest, to get us started on that path, in linking it to what we have just been saying, I want to suggest that Jesus' teaching on persecution has not ended. See, one of the things when we read the last beatitude is that we think of persecution as being done with that beatitude. But I actually think that he's riffing on that. I think he's elaborating on persecution here. And in my mind, Jesus is outlining the conditions of persecution. Living as salt and light will set you up to experience a certain persecution. So there's a tension here, Rustin.
Yeah.
I think salt and light provide a tension that is, first of all, is really difficult for us to live. We'll get into that. And second of all, will lead to being misunderstood, at the least.
So that's the framework of persecuted.
Yeah.
I like what you had said before about we need not rush ahead and think about particular ways of being persecuted, but I guess the suggestion here is that if you do all these things in the Beatitudes, you have just set yourself inside the conditions in which persecution happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Is that?
Well said.
Okay.
So let's take these one by one. First of all, salt.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds silly to say, but there's a lot to say about salt.
A lot.
And there's almost too much to say about salt. I mean, people don't realize how important salt was.
Yeah.
I mean, wars were fought over
Through most
salt.
of history. I read recently that even in the Revolution, well, I was watching Hamilton, right? So
Yeah,
I
right.
started spending my nights like reading Revolutionary War history now because it's so fun. There was a big to-do about salt in the Revolutionary War, and Benjamin Franklin making a deal with some foreign power, and I guess salt was pretty important to those guys.
Very important.
Yeah.
And of
So
course,
even more so in the ancient world, I'm assuming.
yeah, and as a lot of people know, it's not just for its seasoning,
Yeah.
not just for its flavor, which is the first thing I think of when I think of salt, but it was for its preservative use.
Yeah.
And it acted as an antibiotic even and prevented mold in meat, and it did that by being thoroughly immersed into the meat. Yeah.
There was, salt. We've heard all these sermons probably, but salt for purification.
Purification, yeah.
Salt used as fertilizer, which was always a surprise to me because
I
I'd
had
always
not heard that
I'd always
one.
heard of salting fields as a way to kill crops, but the right amount of salt apparently is a good fertilizer for growing things.
Okay, that's good to know.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, what are some of the other? You named it. I guess some of them: preserving agents, flavor.
Yeah.
Salt in other places, I think even in Scripture, is a metaphor for wisdom, or it was in the ancient world.
Okay.
Salting something is a wisdom.
That's great.
So there's a ton of little, and an ongoing debate about what in particular, if any particular meaning.
It was an era before refrigeration.
Yeah,
There was no way to preserve
Yeah.
things, and salt was used for that.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds to us. But, yeah, and like you said, there's all these different ways that salt could be used, but the important thing is that it was used, and that it was valuable, and that it was important.
Yeah.
And
Roman soldiers were dispatched with a measure of salt on their person. Because it was seen as valuable for trading, but also for survival.
Oh, it's great. It's interesting. When I was in Boy Scouts, they used to give us salt pellets.
Really?
Yeah, like to keep us healthy. But I think that now we know that's unhealthy.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Eat all these salt pellets. That's a tangent.
You are the salt pellets of
Yeah.
the world.
But I think kind of what I zero in on is that it worked at whatever it was doing because it was mixed in. It had properties that salt has properties that can't absorb water, and that makes it work when it's mixed into, especially something that you're trying to preserve, like meat.
Yeah.
And so when I think of salt, I think of
But not only qualities of preservation, but the quality of necessity. Like the world wouldn't function without salt.
Right.
In those days.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a high honor to be called salt of the world.
Okay.
So when I think of salt, I think of proximity.
Mm-hmm.
I think of being really present, because that's what salt is. If it's going to work, it has to be so present, like almost mixed into whatever it's preserving, so that we don't even see it necessarily, but it's there.
Okay.
Its importance is felt. And so I hear that, and I feel like Jesus is saying, if you're salty, then you're amazingly proximate with people, with the culture, with the world.
Yeah.
You are there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then, and take this for what you will, but I kind of juxtapose that with light in a way. Now, first of all, let's give light its due as being so important, because light can be something that we take for granted today. In the age of electricity, in the age of technology that we have at our disposal, our phones give us light. I mean, we can do so much, but light in the ancient world was like a valuable commodity almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Valuable, and it had to be cultivated and tended. You couldn't just flip a switch to turn on a light.
Yeah.
Like we use light. I mean, I always joke that I carry my iPhone around for a light. So if I can't see the keyhole, I use my
Mm-hmm.
iPhone screen to just illuminate. But yeah, light in that world is not instant or easy.
Mm-mm.
So super valuable, and you had to have a relationship with it. You had to cultivate it. You had to keep it going, right?
Mhm.
And being without it could be very dangerous.
Yeah, totally dangerous. Probably was not as available to a lot of
Mhm.
people as we would think, you know. So you really relied on the
Yeah.
sun for more than just.
Yeah, it's maybe something that salt and light have in common. If this is in the mind of Jesus, that these are two of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world: salt
Mhm.
and light.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So you've got that value,
Yeah.
but when I say juxtaposed, what I mean is whereas salt is kind of mixed into its properties,
Mm-hmm.
light is the total opposite of darkness, and that's what makes it effective. You've
Yeah.
got darkness, but when you have light, it stands against darkness.
Yeah.
And it's whereas salt is hard to see because it's so proximate,
Yeah.
light is totally other than.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there it is. You can't help but notice it.
Right. Salt kind of mixes in and even brings out flavors in food, for example.
Right.
But light completely obliterates darkness.
It obliterates darkness, and therefore it's useful that way.
Yeah.
So both of them have this use,
Yeah.
and in some ways they're juxtaposed.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So some people would suggest that what you've got here is intense proximity on the one hand
Mm-hmm.
and holiness on the other hand.
Yeah.
And when I say holiness, I mean otherness. Like
Yeah.
light is completely other than dark.
Right.
So we've got Jesus telling us to live holy and be other than the culture around us and the people around us
Yes.
so that people will see.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also telling us to be amazingly proximate to the people
Yeah.
around us and the culture around us so that we are felt. You know, and you've got those two together,
Yeah.
which sounds amazing and sounds great, but I think creates a tension.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, what I was thinking through is the tension is that in practice, Rustin, usually it's easy to do one or the other. And when we do one, it tends to cancel the other out in practice. I'm not saying it should. I'm not saying
Yeah,
it has
okay.
to. I'm just saying naturally, if we're not careful, that's what happens.
Yeah.
So in other words, when we get serious about being other than the people around us and other than the culture, and I'm not going to cultivate the values of my culture. Instead, I'm going to cultivate the values of Jesus, and I'm going to try to live according to this politic of love that we talked about, you know. And I'm going to be other. I'm going to be separate than everyone else. Usually, when we do that, even if we don't mean to, we tend to separate ourselves.
Mhm.
We become other. You know, in
Yeah.
maybe even not relatable anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe we live in our own neighborhoods where
Yeah.
nobody who doesn't think like us live, and
All right.
we go to schools where nobody except people that think like us go to school, and we work where only people that think like us work, and you know, pretty
Yeah.
soon we found ourselves like in an enclave.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's tons of examples of that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's what tends to happen.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if we make a concerted effort to be mixed in, to be incredibly proximate to the culture around us, so that we're salt in maybe we don't stand out at all, but we're felt.
Yeah.
What happens a lot of times is we lose our otherness. We start to become
Yeah.
like everything around us.
Right. You lose the saltiness, as Jesus says, right?
Yeah.
Your effectiveness. It's funny too because salt. I don't know what Jesus had in mind about chemistry, but it's hard to dilute salt, apparently, like chemically. The only way is to dilute it in water or something like that. It's hard to break it down. Salt doesn't actually lose its saltiness, which is a funny
Yeah.
thing, unless you dilute it.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting wrinkle there.
It is. So,
I'm sure Jesus knew that. Is what I'm getting at.
yeah.
But he warns about losing your saltiness. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this just brings to mind how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
How do we live proximate and yet holy?
Yeah.
One of the first things that comes to mind, I think of the statistics that I have seen about kids who grow up youth group, youth group kids. Not that there's anything wrong with youth group kids at all. I mean, youth groups are awesome. But, they have statistics about kids who grow up maybe homeschooled in youth groups and stuff like that go away to college.
Yeah.
And that they tend to fall away from their faith pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
And they say one of the reasons is because, they have spent so much of their life living separate from, and now they're mixed in, and they don't know how to navigate that. So that instead of maintaining their otherness, they just become like. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they hear good music for the first time.
They go, look what I've been robbed of all of my life.
I've been missing out on Led Zeppelin my whole life. Yeah.
So, I don't know, Rustin, do you have any practical suggestions on how we can live this way? Proximate and other?
Yeah. No, I think I think you've set it up perfectly though. There's the tension, because to try to do this Christian stuff without some sense of identity with a community, a Christian community, is to be set up to lose your saltiness, your effectiveness in proximity, where you work. If you're isolated, if you know nobody else who's encouraging you and walking with you and talking out issues with you as you go, it's just so easy to be subsumed into the wider culture. And we all are in all sorts of hidden ways, right? We just get kind of swept along ideologically in all sorts of ways. In our moment, in politics, left and right? So I think that part's difficult. And then the opposite is true. That it's super easy to kind of withdraw back into like the Christian enclave and to be so separate that you're no good to the actual culture around you. And so there's always been this tension in Christian history of movements that are withdrawing in order to preserve Christian identity, and sometimes in history that's really been necessary. You think of the early monastics, for example. But then the opposite is true, that you can be so isolated that you're no good to the culture that's going on without you.
Yeah.
So there's always a tension, and I think that happens on a large scale and in large movements in history of the church, and but it also happens in our personal lives of like being consumed by the culture, by its ideologies and thought processes and values, or on the other extreme, being so withdrawn from it that we aren't present to it in order to serve and to do good and to help shape culture.
Yeah.
So that tension, I think, there's just a long history of that in Christian history.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
I can imagine, not that you have to share any stories or anything, but I can imagine that you had to walk this line yourself as part of a band that was a quote-unquote Christian band.
Yeah.
You signed with a Christian label, but yet I know that the last thing you would want to do is to be just categorized as he's a Christian artist instead of an artist, and so...
Yeah.
I can just imagine there's a tension there that you've walked.
Yeah, it's a tension. I don't know that I have a lot of wisdom about it now, but it was really rough in my early 20s signing to a label, a Christian label, being a Christian band, and doing it from a place of artistic expression. I mean, to me, making the music was filled with theology. The presence of God is wiring in me the desire to communicate things and to make art, and that's why I was drawn to it and got into it. Funny enough, as soon as you get into that world of Christian music, this was back in the 1990s. Remember that?
So long ago, yeah.
Back then, I don't know what it's like now. Back then, what I found in the industry in those days was that they were far more interested in my testimony than the art that I was making. So it started to make it look like the art was just propaganda for promoting something else rather than the art being the thing that I wanted to express, which was a big problem. It's often a big problem with, Christian art.
Yeah.
But that speaks directly to this question of, or the tension between being proximate to the world, doing things that are going to connect with people, and being separate enough that you still have something to say that is distinctly Christian.
Yeah.
I think that's always a challenge for artists in general. But
yeah, I think that this is a tension that's hard for all of us to live into.
Yeah.
And I do, just as a teaser, on down the road in Matthew, as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, I really believe that Jesus gives us some examples about how to live in this tension.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to those examples if we progressively make our way through the Sermon on the Mount. We will get to some examples, and there's good conversation there and a lot for us to learn from.
All right.
But I think that we can learn a lot. I mean, I think that we naturally experience this tension in everyday life. So even if we're not all musicians in a Christian band, we've come into this kind of tension about how to be proximate and how to maintain our otherness.
I have conversations with folks at Vox all the time who are in whatever field they're in and wrestling with these very issues. How do I bring my faith to bear on what it is that I'm doing 40 hours a week?
I've got an easy example. And by the way, I want to say as a little caveat here, I was not insinuating earlier that there's anything wrong with homeschooling or going to private schools or anything like that. I'm just saying. I mean,
no, it's good to say. We as a family have done all measures of different kinds of schooling, and are still finding our way. So
we just have to be aware of the challenges.
There's
and the
challenges
tension.
in every direction.
Yeah. But here's an example of where we come across this tension in a lot of our lives, is when we're parents. So if you're going to be a parent someday, or if you already are a parent, because number one, we want to be salt with our kids. We want to be proximate with our kids. We want to be present to them. Yeah. I want my kids to be able to say that I am and was a present dad. Yeah. Not perfect, but present. So, however that presence looks like in the context of your family, but you're there, you're listening, you're talking, you're engaging with them. With my kids, I always watch their shows. Like my kids my daughter went through a time when she was into the Disney Channel, and my son went through a time when he was into the Clone Wars, and I was there like watching these things with them, and the Clone Wars was a lot easier than the Disney Channel for me, but or listening to their music with them, or playing video games with them, all of that. A lot of it's really fun, but it's still presence. Yeah. But at the same time,
hey, don't tell my wife. I think playing video games with my kids is really hard work.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's what
Let's be sure to tell our wives
honey,
that.
I'm doing my part of parenting here while I'm playing with my kids.
At the same time, we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that we are kids, that we are our kids' peers or friends. There's an otherness to us because we are adults and because we are parents. Yeah. And so as much as I'm hanging out with my kids, as present as I am with you, at the same time, I need to carry myself in a way in which you always know that I am your dad. Yeah. And I'm not you. And there's a difference here. And that maintains their respect of me. Yeah. And in some ways, it keeps our relationship healthy because it's how it should be, but it's otherness. There's an otherness and there's a proximity, and they go together.
Wow, and that's so good. That's such a great example because it's so easy to see in my own parenting, but it's more easier for me to see in people around me than to see it in myself. But there's always a temptation to either be too much separated. I'm too adult to play with you, or just authoritarian. You're going to do it my way, and I don't care what you think. And you're the kid, and I'm the adult, and you're going to be quiet. And right, there's a lot of that in Christian circles.
You can see parents erring on that side.
Right. Yeah. But the opposite is kind of the caricature of the cool mom or the cool dad. Yeah. It's like we're going to be buds with our kids, and you can drink at our house. Yeah. Right?
Exactly.
Because I want to be your friend. And then you're no longer the parent, and so you can't provide anything that is, guidance. So there is the tension of like going too far into being buddy-buddy with the kid, but also too far in being authoritarian and restrictive
Right.
to your kid. So
Right.
that's the tension kind of that
Yeah.
we're drawing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the salt and the light is something we're called to practice every day. You know, if you're a parent, you're called to practice
Yeah.
that every day, just naturally. But I think that we have to practice it in our work
Yeah.
and in our civic life
Mm-hmm.
and in the church and in school
Yeah.
and I mean just everywhere. And Jesus is just addressing this head on. And again, I see all of this under the umbrella of the persecution where he ended the Beatitudes. I think Jesus
Yeah.
is saying, when you live this way, when you're proximate and other,
Mm-hmm.
get ready because it's not going to be an easy road.
Right.
You know, you will experience some pushback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pushback.
Yeah.
That sounds better than persecution, but
Yeah. Persecution
They're-
seems harsh.
they're
but, yeah.
they're coming from the same place.
You know, Rustin, I think it was persecution for his audience.
Yeah.
Because I think they face dangers that we don't face.
Yeah.
I think they could have lost their job or lost
Yeah.
their business,
That's right.
you know, by being
Well,
ostracized.
yeah, that's
But whereas we risk being looked at funny, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Or being called wishy-washy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be misunderstood
Mm-hmm.
one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah. Well, all this language reminded me of the Nicene Creed, right? So we've talked about this before, but
Yeah.
there's a line in there that it confesses we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a rich, I mean, they meant every word, right? Back
Right.
then they know what they're doing. But inside of that phrase, there are these two pairs of words that stand in tension. The first is we are one and we are Catholic. So one meaning there is only one church,
Mm-hmm.
right? Paul says that. One church, one baptism. Catholic means, in the small c sense, that it's a church that is present in infinite iterations all over the world throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one church, but it's also scattered into all these Catholic expressions of the
Mhm.
church. So it's one and it's Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
The other pair of words is the important one for this conversation. That we believe in a holy church and an apostolic church. So the holy part is this otherness you're talking about.
Mhm.
That's partly what holy means, set apart,
Right.
right? It's other.
Mm-hmm.
So we are to be a holy church, as in we're not like the other kids. We don't participate in the same binary right and left, and
Mhm.
we're not like that. But at the same time that we're holy and set apart and other, we are apostolic, which is a way of saying, in your word, present,
Mm-hmm.
or what the word literally means is sent,
Mhm.
like an ambassador is sent. So you think about like an ambassador of the United States to some nation in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
That ambassador represents all of the United States, but is uniquely present personally in that other country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the word apostolic means. The church is to be apostolic. We're to represent Christianity in general,
Mm-hmm.
but we're to be personal in our place where we are, while being holy. We're other, but we're present. We're holy and we're apostolic.
I love that.
Yeah, those people were brilliant who wrote that.
Yeah. So this tension
Yeah.
is just within the language
Yeah.
that is our calling in the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we could say it like this, just to drive it home. Holy and apostolic is to be light while being salt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Rustin. I appreciate this conversation so much.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the tension that the Jews must have felt when they heard Jesus for the first time. You know, if you think about it, they were probably expecting either zealots to be zealots, which were people who fought
Yeah.
for the new kingdom, or Essenes who pulled away. And I think Jesus is just outlining a third option, which is like
Yeah.
something that they hadn't imagined before, which they were
Yes.
probably just going, crud, that just sounds really hard, because it is
Yeah.
really hard. And then Jesus elaborates on how hard it is as he goes along. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the purpose. That's what it's
Yeah,
about.
and he's going to have to elaborate because it's, as we said, a new way.
Yeah.
It's not let's just take the best ideas from this side and just find a centrist kind of middle
Mhm.
way that appeases everyone. We're going to lay down these binary, bifurcated lenses,
Mhm.
and we're going to have our imaginations completely transformed
Yeah.
by this new kingdom, this new way of life.
Yeah.
That's going to take a while.
Yeah. Well said. Well,
Yeah.
that sets us up to move on in Matthew, and we look forward, of course, to doing that next week. And
Yeah.
thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
And I would like to just leave us. I won't read the whole Nicene Creed, but I would like to leave us by just reading the last part of the Nicene Creed that has this language that you alluded
Okay.
to. So we've already talked about how we believe in one God, in one Lord Jesus Christ. And now we move into we believe in the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say that, we say we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. He proceeds from the Father and the Son, and with the Father and the Son is worshipped and glorified.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke through the prophets. And then we believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church.
Mhm.
Maybe the emphasis is on the and,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
We affirm one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We look forward to the resurrection of the dead and to life in the world to come. Amen. Amen.
Amen.